Welcome back. Thursday, August 21st. That's when the first two public school systems in our state, Cheshire and Ansonia, will welcome students back to class. It's coming quickly, and there's been a lot of things happening with the U.S. Department of Education with this new administration. Here to talk about the concerns regarding how Connecticut schools might be affected this new school year is Kate Diaz, president of the Connecticut Education Association, the largest teachers union in our state. Thank you for being here. So, a lot of things you're probably watching this upcoming school year. Is there one main thing you think parents and families should be aware of?
I think that the smartest thing to pay attention to is budgets, because one of the most significant impacts of the federal shifts is going to be on how municipalities manage their budgets. So if I were to give one piece of advice to families, it's to tune into what are your boards of education talking about. Are there cuts that they're potentially considering? Things that you as a parent may want to advocate to maintain, things like mental health services or before or after school programs, sports, things that potentially could be cut if we see wide-scale federal cuts come into play. Now, we've fought off the first round of federal cuts through legislation and through activism and legal efforts of our Attorney General, but we know that there's more coming. And that's what's going to happen to families is there's going to be immediate cuts at the local level.
Have we seen any cuts yet to some of those services you're talking about?
So we have started to see scaling back of programs, sort of as a cautionary measure, really, districts paying attention to, do we have the ability to offer a before or after school care situation? We've seen considerations, cutbacks in staffing, kind of cautionary tales about, wait a minute, should we hold back on hiring a social worker or an additional kindergarten teacher? So we've started to see very subtle shifts and making sure that superintendents are kind of like really cautious about where we would normally add positions, maybe taking positions away due to attrition and wondering like, if we push our class sizes up a little bit, can we hold off on hiring someone? So I think it's really critical for us as families and communities to really pay attention to how those decisions are being made and what are the long-term impacts, because increasing things like class size have a strong, strong impact on student achievement. So we want to make sure that if we're having to make those choices, we understand why and we understand what the impact will be down the road.
Yeah, from a teacher's perspective, say the class size goes from 25 to 30. What does 5 extra kids do to a classroom?
Well, there's a bunch of things, and I've taught in a classroom of 12 and I've taught in a classroom of 30. And what I'll say is you have several issues. One is proximity. It's very difficult physically in a classroom in the state of Connecticut to actually physically get to 30 children because they're really densely packed in that sort of scenario. The other thing is, as a high school teacher, we might have a 45-minute class period. You're literally talking about less than a minute you get to engage with any individual student in that time frame. And also, I think the ability to build community, the more dense the group in there, the more their students there are, the harder time it is to build those conversations and those collaborative opportunities that we really place such a high value on. So we do know that higher class sizes, the larger the class is, the less impactful we as educators get to be. There's like a great sweet spot depending on grade level between that 20 and 25. And I can tell you as a teacher, the minute you go over that 25, you start to have a really, to really rebalance time, rebalance grouping, rebalance resources, and it really starts to eat into your ability to do all the things you really want to be able to do.
And the fact that we're even having this conversation about density and packing more kids into a classroom shows how far we've come in 5 years. When 5 years ago we were dealing with the pandemic in schools, and these kindergartners will be kind of those COVID babies. Anything you're hearing from teachers about how they're preparing for this incoming class or any other changes now that we're 5 years out?
So I think one of the biggest things we've learned is how important social and emotional connections are, building that community. We've learned that the children coming out of COVID have a lot more need in terms of anxiety. They want to be a part of a community. That is so key and critical for their ability to kind of launch into the learning piece. So as we talk to our kindergarten friends, they're really talking about, okay, what are the skill sets? It's why we emphasize play-based learning so much. We know that these are children who were isolated off, like significant portion of their formative years. So we really do need to get them into the classroom and working together and learning about how to deal and communicate with each other. And so a lot of the kindergarten skill sets that they're emphasizing are things that can be done best through play, right? This idea that we need to learn to work together. And so that's a lot of the shift that we're starting to do in our classrooms. I would argue that play-based learning serves us well K-12. I used to do things with my statistics students that would kind of land in that world of play. And we know that that is whimsical, it's fun, it's creative, it's engaging. So leaning into that and knowing that that's what our children really need in order to be good learners, I think has been powerful.
Yeah, and I know there was a state law a year or two ago about play-based learning for those younger students. This year, we just came out of a big legislative session. Any new state laws that'll be implemented this year you want parents to know about?
So I think the biggest emphasis was on special education. They had a whole committee that really kind of dug in and said, what can we do to support our special education students? And so there was a lot of work done to develop programs to try and figure out how do we keep as many students in their home school as possible, creating additional intervention measures. So I think if I was a parent of a special education student, I'd be keying in and having conversations about how is this school going to work with the new laws and the opportunities. There's some grant programs that have been embedded into that law. The idea of like, we really want to continue to build out the continuum of services to meet all of our students' needs. And I think that's a real opportunity for families to engage in that conversation and to look to it and say, okay, where is our opportunity to get really the best for our child?
But those special education students too might also be more impacted by some of the federal cuts that really they kind of have to watch both closely, it would seem.
Absolutely, and the interesting kind of challenge in the special education world is the services become mandated regardless of the funding. So ultimately, no matter what happens, we're obligated to provide the services in an IEP that have been outlined. That is a legal contract with families. The ultimate problem is if, for example, the federal government scales back their contributions to the federally funded services, we have to make those monies up elsewhere. So that's where the cuts will start to impact, well, maybe we don't have to provide other services, right? Are there counseling services we actually don't have to provide that get eaten into? Are there community-based outreach projects that then become scaled back? We have a lot of services where we are attempting to outreach into the community for attendance or other matters, trying to be supportive around housing and other welfare-related issues, right? Food insecurities, these kinds of things. All of those things get scaled back if we have to start and can only fund sort of the minimum, because that's what we are legally obligated to do. So we have to remember that schools are really centers of our community that really kind of outreach into a lot of different spaces. When we start cutting funding, we start cutting the opportunities for our children.
Well, it sounds like us reporters will be at a lot of school board meetings this year to follow all of this and see what happens. Thank you so much for being here.